Part 7 Will Training. It is not enough that you should develop strong willpower, important though such development may be. It is not enough that the driver should secure the services of a strong pair of horses to pull his chariot. He must also be able to guide and control, direct and master them. So, though you may be possessed of the strongest will, you will be unable to direct efficiently its energies and powers unless by careful, scientific training and discipline you have mastered its mechanism. To train your will you must teach it and cultivate it. You must educate it, exercise it, discipline it, so as to impart to it the habit and tendency to move along the lines which your reason indicates to be the most advantageous and efficient. All scientific training of the will begins with instruction concerning the formation of advantageous habits, the building of clean and clear paths over which the will may travel in action toward achievement. By establishing the proper habits of will action you will render your will far more efficient, and at the same time will accomplish the maximum of desirable results with the minimum expenditure of energy. Here we meet with another of those interesting paradoxes which, as we have said, abound in the realm of psychology. The paradox is, A. While the will moves most easily and with the least friction over the paths of habit, yet, B. Habit itself is originally formed by the exercise of the will. The will lends itself most readily to habit, and prefers to travel over the lines of least resistance in habit emotivity, yet, when set to the task, the will builds the lines and paths of advantageous and desirable habits over which it will travel in the future. It acts as does the strong and powerful stream of water which first cuts for itself a deep channel in the earth, and afterwards travels through that channel as if bound and restricted by it. Both the stream and the will are bound and restricted by their self-built channels, but each creates for itself its future restricting and directing walls. Habit has its correspondence in material objects. In fact, all things seem to come under the rule of habit in some form. A piece of paper, or a pattern of cloth, will tend to fold more easily along the lines of the crease made by the first folding. The more often the fold is made, the easier becomes each subsequent folding along the same lines. Water finds it easier to travel over the path traversed by the preceding streams of water. The raindrop on the window pane follows the same law. Any voluntary action performed several times in the same general way tends to develop into emotion a habit, and, indeed, after a time the motion becomes almost instinctive, and is performed by the subconscious mentality to which it has been passed on for attention and direction. Each and every time you dress yourself, or put on your shoes, you perform a number of habitual actions of which you are scarcely conscious. This is also true of your actions of walking, using your knife and fork, and other familiar performances which have become habitual to you. The value of habit in the training and education of the will is very great. Not only does habit, 1. Simplify the process of any given form of action, and, 2. Lessen the degree of voluntary attention required for the performance of any given action, but it also, 3. Gives greatly increased weight and power to the emotional impulse toward any given action, thus increasing its emotional value and thereby enabling it to resist more effectively the demands and urging of an opposing set of emotional impulses and desires. When you have made a habit of efficient and advantageous will action, you will have progressed far on the road to the attainment of strong and efficient willpower. Rules for establishing habits of will. The following rules will be found most useful and effective in your task of establishing the proper habits of will. In applying them you must employ your table of will values and your fixed standard to determine which particular habits you shall strive to develop, cultivate and acquire. When in the following rules you come across the words the habit or the habits, you will understand that such terms apply to those habits which express the desires, tested by reason, which stand well to the top of your table of will values, or else to minor courses of will action which serve to further the interests of these high values. Here follow the rules. I. Employ a strong initiative. In launching a new habit, employ a strong initiative. Put as much determination and motor energy as possible into the particular course of action. At the start, launch the ship of habit as far as possible into the stream of action, employing the full strength of the determination and will force at your command. This will impart to the new habit sufficient momentum to carry it well past the first dangerous places, and to give you a good running start. Your principal danger of yielding to temptation will come at the start, but if your momentum is sufficient to carry you past these earlier temptations, you will be able more easily to resist the later ones. The longer you manage to postpone the time of the first temptations, the less power will those temptations have over you. Therefore, always remember, try to get a good running start. 2. Exercise care at the beginning. The beginning of the formation of the new habit is the most critical time of the entire task. This because the power of the opposing habit has not as yet begun to fade by reason of the manifestation of the opposite, i.e., the new habit. The rule is, never allow even a single exception or failure to occur until the new habit has become well established. Until the new habit has become well rooted, you must brave it with all your power against the stormy winds of temptation and opposition. It has well been said that failure or yielding to temptation at this early stage is like letting fall the ball of string which you have been carefully winding. The single slip undoes more than many turns of the hand will be able to rewind. The psychology of the case is this: the two opposing impulses must be handled so that the advantageous one may have an uninterrupted series of successes, and the disadvantageous one a continuous series of failures. The result of this preliminary series of conflicts plays a very important part in the determination of the future relation of the two opposing forces. Here is found to apply the rule of to him who hath shall be given, and to him who hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath. The habit of victory once acquired by the advantageous impulse, it will thereafter possess an immense psychological advantage over its repeatedly defeated opponent. The man who determines to establish a certain advantageous habit will surely fail if he follows Rip Van Winkle's plan of saying that this one doesn't count whenever temptation to violate the rule presents itself. The taking of just one cigar when you have decided to stop smoking, or the taking of just one little extra snooze when you have decided to establish the habit of rising at a certain hour, may prove to be the undoing of the entire purposeful determination. On the other hand, each time one of those early just one more indulgences is resisted and defeated, the purposeful determination becomes stronger, often to a degree out of all proportion to the apparent present actual value of the accomplishment. 3. Repeated performance. In establishing a habit, you should repeat the performance of the associated action as frequently as possible. You will by that means make clearer and wider the mental path over which you wish your will to travel habitually. Moreover, as a consequence, you will exercise the particular faculty which you wish to make strong and to develop in efficiency. The will is strengthened not by the mere mental determination to perform an action, but rather by the actual performance of the action itself. The path of motivity is created only by actually traveling over it, and the oftener it is traveled over, the easier becomes the future journey over it. The actual motor effect of will action gives the set to the brain cells and areas involved in any particular course of action. The actual effort forces you to dig your heels in the ground and to exert your energy. As it has well been said, he who has no solid ground to press against will never get beyond the stage of gesturing making. Therefore, seek every possible opportunity for such action until the habit becomes firmly established. A lock works better after it has been used several times. A garment clings better to the body after it has been worn a few times. The cloth folds more easily in the crease after it has been folded a few times. And as an old writer once said, continued action is like a stream of water, which wears for itself a channel from which it may not easily be turned. 4. Control the attention. So far as possible, do not allow the attention to dwell upon ideas suggesting a course of action opposed to that associated with the new habit. Keep the attention fixed, so far as is possible, upon the ideas associated with the new habit. Thus you will feed the one set of motor ideas, and starve the opposite set. If you are trying to break yourself of the habit of smoking, you are very foolish if you allow your mind to dwell upon the pleasures of the pipe, cigar or cigarette. Instead, let it hold the suggestive ideas and mental pictures of the advantages to be gained by refraining from smoking, and, above all, hold firmly before the mind the idea that you are demonstrating that you have a will strong enough to enable you to break an undesirable habit. You will do well, particularly at first, to follow the example of the companions of Ulysses, who stopped their ears with wax that they might not hear the seductive voices of the sirens. The voyagers who neglected this precaution were lured to their destruction, because they allowed the tempting sounds to enter their ears. This is not cowardice, but the part of courage, when rightly understood. He jests at scars, who never felt a wound. As has well been said, it takes more courage to turn away from some ideas than to face them, and the coward is sometimes he who remains on the scene. One of the most effective methods of inhibiting or neutralizing the power of a disturbing or threatening desire or impulse is that of deliberately changing the direction of the attention. It is an axiom of psychology that, while attention follows interest, nevertheless, attention may be directed by a determined act of will so as to arouse interests not previously present. This interest, so awakened, rises to desire, and desire gives motive via power and direction to will. In this axiom we have the key to the problem which we are now considering. It is a well-established fact of psychology that, in the processes of the deliberative will and of the determinative will, that particular alternative which in some way attracts and holds the attention will have greater weight and power than would otherwise be the case. The interesting alternative is given the more favorable position, while the uninteresting one is pushed to the side sometimes unjustly. This process is akin to that which we experience in ourselves when we give the preference to a political candidate whom we know and like, rather than to one unfamiliar to us and who does not arouse our interested attention. In view of this fact, you may see how important it is that you should direct and hold your attention, so far as is possible, upon the course of action which your reason and your table of will values inform you to be the best and more advantageous one, and to shut out of your attention and interest, so far as is possible, the opposing alternative. By doing this you give to the advantageous idea the added strength of attention and interest, and you place the objectionable idea in the far less favorable position. Many a man has prevented himself from acting foolishly and wrongfully by determinedly turning his attention to the probable consequences of the proposed harmful action. It has been well called a master stroke of the inhibitory battle to bring into the field of consciousness an idea of the benefits of a contrary action, or the mental picture of the evil effects of the proposed action. The drunkard thinking of the sick child at home is strengthened in his effort to inhibit the urge of appetite. The more that Macbeth and his wife held in mind and pictured in imagination the idea of fame and power, the stronger grew their desire and determination to kill the king. Their attention developed increased interest and desire, and thus heightened the power of the original motive. The will is able to determine which of the motives influencing it shall become the stronger. It accomplishes this by deciding which of two alternative sets of ideas shall occupy the field of attention during the desire conflict. Emotion and desire develop under the stimulus of attention. The will, being the master of attention, has the power to encourage or to banish the ideas calling forth the emotional feeling and the resulting desires. If one set of ideas is kept well in the field of attention, a strong emotional interest and desire may gather around it, but if the opposite set of ideas is called into the field of attention, and is then held firmly there, then the first set of ideas will lose interest and motive power. This principle is illustrated in one of Molière's comedies. Jeppy, a dissolute character, is sent by his wife, a washerwoman, to the village shop to buy a piece of soap, and is entrusted with a small coin for that purpose. But Jeppy wants a drink. He knows that his wife will beat him if he wastes the money, but he also knows that he has a strong craving for the glass of wine. A desire conflict ensues. Jeppy says to himself, "My stomach says wine, my back says soap." He is torn by the internal struggle. Finally, as he walks along, he sees the tavern ahead of him. This decides the conflict, the object in the field of attention proving stronger than that which is outside that field. He says, "Is not a man's stomach more to him than his back?" "Yes," say I. And into the tavern he walks. Had he but looked around the corner and there seen his wife wearing a look of determination on her face, and carrying a big stick in her hand as she marched after him, he would have decided in favor of his back rather than his stomach. The two sets of desires and impulses were nicely balanced in the case of Jeppy, but the added element of aroused attention and interest brought the victory for the wine, and the defeat of the soap. The following rules will be found useful in connection with the direction of attention and will training, particularly in the matter of inhibiting and restraining the unwelcome and disturbing desires and impulses which pull in the direction opposed to that of the high values and the fixed standard. 1. Feed the positives. Feed the will with suggestive ideas and mental pictures favorably representing the desires and actions which constitute the top values of your table of will values, and which are in accord with your fixed standard. 2. Starve the negatives, starve the disadvantageous desires and impulses, and their resulting actions, by resolutely refusing to allow your attention to be directed toward suggestive ideas and mental pictures favorably representing the desires and actions constituting the low values or bottom values of your table of will values, and which are in opposition to your fixed standard. 3. The law of opposites. In cultivating an advantageous desire or impulse, and its resulting action, resolutely refuse to allow your attention and imagination to become occupied with suggestive ideas and mental pictures favorably representing the opposite set of desires and impulses and their resulting action. In restraining, inhibiting or neutralizing a disadvantageous desire or impulse and its resulting action, deliberately and determinedly direct your attention and imagination upon the suggestive ideas and mental pictures which favorably represent the opposing, i.e., the advantageous, set of desires and impulses, and their resulting actions. The reason for the above rules is as follows: 1. Attention and interest feed desires and impulses, and strengthen ideas. Lack of attention and interest starve them. 2. By bestowing attention and interest upon one set of desires, impulses or ideas, you tend to inhibit, weaken and starve the opposite set. Both of these facts are highly important. You should memorize this statement concerning them. Exercises in will training. The observance of the rules stated in the foregoing portions of this section will be found to give the will considerable valuable exercise in will training. In addition to these, however, there are several general forms of exercises which will prove of great value to you in the direction of strengthening the fiber of your will, and of developing your powers of steadfastness, resolution and determination. By exercising your will against obstacles, opposition and hindrances, those existing in the outer world, and those which have their abode in your inner world of habit, desire and impulse, you give to your will a resisting power and an aggressive force which will make themselves felt in the affairs and conduct of your everyday life when you are required to assert your willpower and strength of will. Your attention is now called to the following principles and methods of will training directed to these ends. Tempering the will along the lines of resistance. The practical thinkers of the race, for centuries past, have known that one of the best possible exercises for the development of strong willpower, and for its efficient training, is that of the deliberate and determined performance of certain selected unpleasant tasks, this performance being undertaken and carried out not necessarily by reason of any actual immediate value to oneself or others of the performance itself, but, rather, solely and simply because of the valuable exercise of the will thus obtained, and the equally valuable training of the will accomplished by these means. Many of the ancient occult teachers began the instruction of their pupils in this way, the result being that the persistent practice of this method, under the intelligent guidance of the teachers, developed and trained the pupils into veritable giants of willpower. The world-renowned Jesuit order has for hundreds of years employed similar methods for the purpose of strengthening the wills of their chosen students and neophytes. As a result, the Jesuits are renowned for the powers of determination, persistency and endurance manifested by their members. Many of the best modern psychologists have revived this old teaching and its methods, and references to the principle may be found in many of the textbooks of the modern masters of this branch of science. For instance, the following statement of William James, one of the best practical philosophers and psychologists of modern times: keep the faculty alive by a little gratuitous exercise every day. That is, be systematically ascetic or heroic in little unnecessary points. Do every day something for no other reason than that you would rather not do it, so that when the hour of dire need draws nigh, it may find you not unnerved and untrained to stand the test. The man who has daily inured himself to habits of concentrated attention, energetic volition, and self-denial in unnecessary things, will stand like a tower when everything rocks around him, and when his softer fellow mortals are winnowed like chaff in the blast. See how closely the above resembles in practice the discipline of the ancient magi, or occultists. Says Evelyn Underhill, the first lesson of the would-be magus is self-mastery. In its essence, magical initiation is a traditional form of mental discipline, strengthening and focusing the will. There is nothing supernatural about it. Like the more arduous, more disinterested self-training of the mystic, it is character building with an object, conducted upon a heroic scale. Says Eliphas Levi, By means of persevering and gradual athletics, the powers of the body may be developed to an amazing extent. It is the same with the powers of the soul. Would you govern yourself and others? Learn how to will. How may one learn to will? This is the first secret of magical initiation, and it was to make the foundations of this secret thoroughly understood that the antique keepers of the mysteries surrounded the approach to the sanctuary with so many terrors and illusions. They did not believe in a will until it had given its proofs, and they were right. Strength cannot prove itself except by conquest. Idleness and negligence are the enemies of will, and this is the reason why all religions have multiplied their practices and made their cults difficult and minute. The more trouble one gives himself for an idea, the more power one acquires in regard to that idea. Hence the power of religions resides entirely in the inflexible will of those who practice them. The ancient and modern method of accustoming the will to face and to accomplish disagreeable tasks, and to overcome disagreeable conditions by sheer determination, is one of the very best systems of schooling and tempering the will. By accustoming the will to act in this way, you will school it so that it will act efficiently when similar conditions arise in actual life. This has well been called tempering the will along the lines of the greatest resistance. The will trained in this way is always ready to meet disagreeable emergencies, no matter how suddenly they may present themselves, nor how serious they may be. It has well been said of men trained in this way, that while others will be crying over spilt milk, the possessors of trained wills of this kind will be hunting for another cow to milk, or may even have found such a cow and to have actually begun to milk her. On the other hand, the person who carefully and habitually endeavors to escape unpleasant tasks, disagreeable facts, and uncomfortable circumstances, lacks such preparatory training of his will when he is actually confronted with disagreeable circumstances or apparently disastrous conditions. His will be unequal to the task of overcoming them. The men who have pushed and elbowed their way to the front ranks of endeavor in any of the walks of life, have developed wills of this kind. Some of them have obtained the development by strenuous experiences in the University of Hard Knocks, while others have anticipated and forestalled this by scientific preparation before the day of the actual examination. Life is filled with disagreeable tasks, and uncomfortable circumstances. To perform the first, and to master the second, requires the trained will. Wise is he who learns his lesson before the hour of trial. He is doubly armed for the fray. Training of this kind has been likened to fire insurance on a house. It costs something in effort and self-denial, but it is something laid by for the hour of need. It is the great reserve fund of habitual will action upon which you can draw in the time of necessity. The importance of such training cannot be overestimated. It is like starting and maintaining an account in a good savings bank. You add to it little by little, and you accumulate rapidly by reason of the compound interest drawn by your deposits. A well-known teacher was wont to advise his pupils to do something occasionally for no other reason than that they would rather not do it, if it were no more than giving up a seat in a streetcar. Napoleon had a will train along these lines. His will was so completely under his control that apparently without any emotional struggle he could enter upon courses of disagreeable, difficult and unpleasant action, even though they involve the greatest hardships. You will find numerous opportunities to exercise your will along this line of training. Every day will furnish you with such. Do something which you particularly dislike to do. Do it not because there is any special merit in the doing, but solely and simply because of the training it will give your will. It is related of a certain man that he was discovered one day carefully studying John Stuart Mill's great work on political economy, a subject which he loathed, and for which he lost no opportunity to express his aversion. When asked why he was doing this, he replied, "I am training my will. I am doing this because I dislike it intensely." The great men of history have trained their will along this line of the greatest resistance, while the average men have been content to exercise their will only along the lines of the least resistance. The former have so trained themselves that when they are required to perform some disagreeable action they do so with as much ease and force as if the action were most agreeable to them. The latter find it almost impossible to perform disagreeable actions except by whipping and spurring themselves to the task, and even then they perform the action only half-heartedly and with but little force or effectiveness. You are positively advised to master this feature of your will training. The day will come when you will thank us from the bottom of your heart for this advice, provided you have followed it. Tempering the will by self-denial. Akin to the preceding exercise is that which consists of the occasional practice of self-denial, i.e., the deliberate denial to yourself of your favorite pleasure. This denial is not to be made because of any direct merit in the sacrifice, or in the act, but merely because of the exercise of the will which is required for the denial, and because of the additional strength acquired by its performance. Many of the penances and other acts of self-denial imposed by the governing authorities of the great religions of the world tend to develop willpower in the individual practicing them. This fact is acknowledged by the best authorities, but it is not generally realized by the masses of people practicing the acts in question. The great religious teachers know that the person who has trained his will along the lines of occasional self-denial will find it easier to resist real temptation when it comes to him. Psychology recognizes a practical value in self-denial and penance, aside from their purely religious elements. The general principles which govern the exercises designed to temper the will by the performance of disagreeable and unpleasant tasks, which we have just considered, apply also to the present case of tempering the will by self-denial. The performance of disagreeable tasks, and the act of refraining from agreeable expressions and manifestations, are alike displeasing to the untrained will. Therefore, the same principle is involved in both, and the will is thereby trained along the same general lines, though the approach is made from opposite directions. In the method of training the will by the practice of self-denial, you must deliberately select some most pleasant action or course of action, something which you wish very much to perform, and then resolutely refuse to perform the same within a certain time limit. The denial may involve the refusal to smoke your customary after-dinner cigar, to drink your favorite cup of coffee, to read the conclusion of an interesting book or of the new installment of a serial story, to eat some particularly desired and favored dish, to attend some play which you have been very anxious to witness. In fact, the refusal to do any particular thing which you earnestly long to do. The time limit must be definitely fixed and must be strictly observed. There is a positive psychological value to the definite time limit. You must be absolutely honest in your selection of the object of your self-denial. It must involve a real test, and must require a real effort of the will to accomplish. You must give up something of real emotional value to yourself, of course only for the time of the exercise, or within the time limits deliberately set by yourself at the start. The time limit must be sufficiently extended to afford a real test of the will. The self-denial must hurt, it must be sufficient to make you smart. You must be a severe taskmaster to yourself in these trials, tests and exercises. There must be no trifling or fooling in the matter. You must set yourself a real man's job, and you must be the real man to accomplish it. Note, in each of the two classes of exercises just considered, you will act wisely not to select tasks of such a nature or character that their successful performance will bring you that comfortable feeling of religious or ethical merit, or of duty well performed, nor anything which you are in duty bound to do, or not to do, in accordance with your accepted codes of religious, ethical, or moral duty or obligation. This caution is necessary because, otherwise, you would have the positive value of duty, or religious or moral obligations, to add weight to your resolute determination and its manifestation. In these exercises you should endeavor to select tasks in which the only motive is the will to pit the will against the push or pull of feelings, impulses and desires, and you should deny to yourself the aid of the added weight of duty, or obligations such as have been mentioned. The only reason for the performance of these exercises is that of arousing the will to will, willing for the sake of willing, willing merely to prove that it is will. Reversing habits. A third method, involving the same general principles, is that either 1. Of doing something which it is your regular habit and custom not to do, or 2. Of not doing something which it is your regular habit and custom to do. In neither of these phases of this exercise, you should select as the task to be performed some action for which you have no special like or dislike apart from the habit, something neither especially agreeable nor yet especially disagreeable, but which you usually do, or not do, solely by reason of an established habit. Some little regular habit of dressing, of proceeding to your business by a certain route, of lunching at a certain place or in a certain part of the room, or something of that kind. Such are the tasks to be selected. This may seem like silly trifling when you first think of it, but wait until you actually try it. You have a surprise awaiting you. Set a time limit here, as in the other cases. As a few examples, we might suggest the following: after ascertaining which particular shoe, or stocking, you put on first in dressing, Deliberately reverse the order for the period of 1 week. Or, follow the same procedure in the matter of placing your right or your left arm, as the case may be. First in your coat when you put it on, change the order of the arm of placing for the period of 1 week. Or, again, change the choice of your morning or afternoon newspaper for one day, occasionally. Or, pursue a different route from that usually followed by you in traveling from one place to another daily, or oftener. This is effective only when you have already established the habit of making the daily trip along a certain regular route. If you will exercise your ingenuity, you will discover many little tasks of this kind to be performed. And, in so doing, you will not only train your will along particularly trying lines, but will also learn a valuable lesson concerning the power of habit and the little courses of action in everyday life. Performing uninteresting tasks. Another method, and one greatly favored in some quarters, is that of deliberately performing some monotonous, purposeless, and uninteresting task just for the sake of willing to will. For instance, 1. Sitting on a chair for 5 minutes, with the arms crossed, and the feet pressed together at the sides of the shoe soles. 2. Walking to and fro in your room for 5 minutes, touching a number of articles in regular order as you pass them. 3. Counting and reaccounting a number of small articles, for 5 minutes. 4. Changing your chair at every count of 25, for 5 minutes. 5. Reading backward and forward a certain paragraph of a book, this one for instance, for 5 minutes. 6. Replacing in a box, very slowly and deliberately, 100 matches, buttons or small pieces of paper. 7. Putting on and taking off a pair of gloves, slowly and deliberately, for 5 minutes. The above examples will give you a general idea of the character of this class of exercises, but actual practice of them will be required to show you the amount of persistent resolution and determination required to perform them properly. Tempering the will by asserting it. Another valuable form of will training, but one which must be employed judiciously, is that in which the will is tempered by actual assertion of its power. By assertion we do not mean to affirm, to aver, to state positively, which is one usage of the term. Instead, we mean that usage which indicates to maintain or defend by words or measures, to vindicate. In tempering the will by assertion, you proceed to assert your will in little things, so as to have your own way about such things irrespective of the actual benefit to be gained direct and immediate. The sole object is to habituate the will to having its way, and thereby to give it confidence in itself and to build up in it the habit of success. You will find that you have been in the habit of giving way to others in the little things concerning action and the doing of things, solely because it has been too much trouble to make an effort of will in the opposite direction. In such cases, when the other person happens to be possessed of a more persistent will to do the little things in his own way, you have found it easier to let him proceed in that way, this notwithstanding that you assert your will readily enough in the greater issues of life. There is a possible danger in allowing the will to acquire too readily the habit of deferring to the will of others by reason of this repeated and customary lack of assertion in the little things. A little vigorous exercise along these lines, once in a while, will act like a tonic to the will, and will keep it in good condition. In exercise of this kind, you should employ your will to assert itself not because of any particular or direct benefit to be derived by securing the thing or action insisted upon, but solely as an exercise of the will itself, and in the direction of establishing the habit of victory for it. In fact, in such exercises you should select something in which nothing of real value is involved, something of no consequence. The exercise should proceed absolutely along the lines of the will to will, and not along those of the pursuit and attainment of something desired for itself. It should be like a physical exercise pursued solely for the purpose of developing and strengthening the muscles, and not for that of performing useful work or attaining some actual desired object. Here, a word of caution is needed. Do not make the mistake of asserting your will wantonly, or for the purpose of overriding and humiliating others needlessly. Again, do not so use it as to create for yourself the reputation of being stubborn or unreasonable, or for having your own way regardless of the rights of others. Avoid all exercises which will attract attention to yourself or to your motives in the matter. You will find enough opportunities to exercise in this way without this drawback. Finally, Do not insist upon having your way in the little things when by so doing you jeopardize having your way in the greater things in view, and, equally, do not insist upon having your way if your own way is the wrong way, and the other way is the right one. Mix common sense and fair play in this exercise of the will. The exercise will be all the better by reason of this. But, with the above cautions in mind, get into the habit of having your own way in the little, unimportant things, at least once in a while, just to get the habit well established and to keep the machinery of will well oiled and running smoothly. Do not let your will get rusty, or gummed up, by reason of disuse and lack of exercise. Bracing the will with affirmations. You will find it beneficial to follow the method of bracing the will with affirmations of its own powers and possibilities. Affirmations and statements of this kind act as a veritable will tonic and invigorator. Along these lines you may use with effect the poem by Ella Wheeler Wilcox, quoted in Section I of this book, also the quotations given in Section V of this book, in which are expressed the thoughts of some of the great minds of the race concerning willpower and its possibilities. All of these quotations have been selected with some particular important point in view. You may also employ in this way the master formula of attainment, viz., I. Definite ideals 2. Insistent desire 3. Confident expectations 4. Persistent determination v. Balanced compensation. And, likewise, the slogan, I can, I will, I dare, I do. You might add to the list any favorite quotations of your own, provided that they serve to inspire, energize and strengthen your purposeful determination and to awaken the will consciousness. Finally, you will do well to add to the list a quotation from Lummies on the last page of the next section of this book. The method of procedure here is as follows: read over each selected quotation, aphorism, maxim or other affirmative statement, until you have extracted its full spirit and essence, and have caught the thought of its originator. Then carefully and thoroughly memorize it, so that you will be able to recall it readily and without undue effort. You must know it by heart as well as you do the words of your favorite song or verse. Take plenty of time for the task, but do not drop it until completed. But do not take up a second selection until you have thoroughly mastered and completed the first. After you have these affirmative selections at your command, get into the habit of recalling them to memory from time to time. Do this at any time of the day when you have a few moments to spare, while on the streetcars, while walking along the street, while waiting in the hotel lobby for someone, while waiting for your train in the station, etc. Meditate upon them, get the inspiration and power from them. Also, at night, just before going to sleep, recall these selections or statements, one at a time, and fall asleep thinking about them. If you should happen to awaken in the middle of the night, don't worry about loss of sleep, or be filled with the fear of insomnia. Instead, let your mind play with these affirmative statements, and allow your soul to bathe itself in their spirit. General suggestions concerning will training. In addition to the special examples of exercises and methods of will training which have just been recommended to you, you will find it useful to invent and to construct exercises of your own designed for the same end, or to create variations or combinations of the exercises and methods to which we have called your attention. Any and all forms of will exercises are beneficial, providing that they set before the will a clearly defined task which is not beyond the powers of the aroused will to accomplish, provided that the will sets itself earnestly to the task of accomplishing it. It is absolutely essential that the will should face the task bravely, and to determine resolutely to accomplish it fully. The exercise must also always call for effort on the part of the will, if the will is expected to benefit by it. An occasional, isolated effort benefits the will, but little repeated and reiterated effort is required. Particularly beneficial are regularly repeated efforts conducted along the lines of definite method, and calling forth the release of willpower in an almost habitual manner. In such exercises, you will do well to focus your willpower, and to concentrate it upon some one end. Cultivate the habit of concentrated will action in your exercises. Form a strong, definite purposeful determination, and then pour into its manifestation the whole power of your will for the time being. Let that one purposeful determination be your dominant motive, and its manifestation your chief aim in life. The successful performance of these exercises will create in you the habit of accomplishing your definite object, the custom of getting the thing done, the fashion of carrying out your determined plan. Your will, in this way, will acquire new confidence in itself. It will acquire the habit of succeeding. It will approach more difficult tasks with a new spirit of confidence and expectation of success. A bolder and braver spirit will animate it, and it will proceed to the new and more difficult task with the spirit of the conqueror. It will have learned how to grapple with a difficult situation as earnestly as one does with a physical enemy. It will proceed to the combat with that tenacity of determination, with that fierceness of resolve, with that passion for success which a writer has well said may almost be called vindictive in its aggressive and persistent quality. Do not let the apparent triviality of the tasks cause you to undervalue their importance in your will training. As has well been said, willpower is built up by a gradual process of practice on the smallest things, and every act of self-conquest in one sphere of life makes the battle easier in all the other spheres. Exercises of this kind, inspired by the determination to gain strength and power of will, and its definite direction and control, if persistently conducted will inevitably lead to that which you seek to gain from them. But, as a celebrated teacher has added, will exercises must be methodical and well regulated as to degree and length, or else they are perhaps worse than useless. We need scarcely remind you that there is no exclusive virtue vested in any one of the particular tasks which we have suggested for your practice and exercise. You may substitute almost any others for them, and, in fact, you will do well to use your ingenuity and powers of invention in that direction. The one thing always to be observed in this connection is that the particular special and definite principles mentioned by us must always be involved and included in your exercises. Again, you may exercise along the lines either, 1, of performing some positive actions during a certain fixed time, or else, 2, of avoiding the performance of some particular actions during such time. The one is a positive form of exercise, the other is the negative form. The new motive. When you have learned to perform the will training exercises, of the kind outlined in this section of this book, you will have made an interesting discovery concerning your feelings, impulses, desires and will action. Heretofore, you have performed your will actions solely by reason of the push or pull of some strong feeling or desire, and you have seen that all will action is caused, directly or indirectly, by feeling and desire. Now, in the performance of these exercises, you will have found that you are acting apparently without the push or pull of feeling or desire. In fact, in several of the exercises you will be actually acting against such push or pull. Then, you may well ask, what is the motive of my action? What is its motive cause? Here, at this point, you make the discovery in question. You will find that you have aroused within yourself the will of feeling, the will of desire, the will of impulse, those strange emotional states which are satisfied and contented solely by the exercise of the will for the mere sake of willing, without regard to the intrinsic value of the act. You here make the acquaintance of the will, that unique mental state which seems to arise at the very center of your mental being, deeper than any feeling, any emotion, any desire, any impulse. Here is the will willing to will, moved only by will, and gratifying only will. This strange mental state is definable only in its own terms. There is nothing else with which to compare it, nothing with which to define it. It must be experienced in order to be understood, but once experienced, it will never be forgotten by you. If you are interested in this newly discovered mental state which, at least we trust, you have already found manifesting in yourself, we strongly advise you to consider carefully the next following section of this book. In it you will find your new feeling and consciousness indicated in further detail. If you have not already made this interesting and important discovery in yourself, you may now be on the verge of it. If so, the reading of the following section entitled Will Consciousness may perhaps hasten the hour of your deliverance, and make easier your new birth into dynamic willpower. The man or woman who experiences will consciousness is reborn and will this time into the world of the will, in which the mastery of will is the normal condition and the habitual state.